Hey, Eddie. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I know it's Friday, but I like to make myself available for issues that you might want to raise, but also I have three specific topics I wanted to discuss today and provide information on. And I'm joined today by Secretary Mike Preston of the Department of Commerce, as well as Judge Porch with the Broadband Office and his Chief of Staff. And then we also have Kisa Smith, the Deputy Director of Department of Human Services, as well as Mary Franklin, our Director of County Coordination. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that we have received the Arkansas Broadband Consultant Report that's been provided, and it's been provided to the legislature. We briefed the legislature earlier this week on it. I want to thank Secretary Preston, Judge Porch, and his team for the work that they did with the consultant. And I also want to compliment the Broadband Development Group for their work. I think it's a very thorough report. It is helpful to us as it shapes the investment of federal and state funds here in Arkansas. I wanted to draw attention to a couple of what I consider important points from this report. First of all, they identified 41,000 more households that had coverage for broadband that was not shown under the FCC map. And that's an illustration of the depth of their review across the state. It was also significant that the consultant specified that while we prefer fiber to be laid as we extend broadband across the state, they recognize that there's a need for fixed wireless or other means in some areas of states that are very difficult, and that flexibility is important and necessary. One major point that struck me from the report is how much the federal government and their rules will cover the deployment of broadband in Arkansas. And right now the numbers are there are 251,000 households under the FCC report that lack coverage in Arkansas. We've identified 41,000 that actually has coverage, so that leaves us 210,000 households in Arkansas. Of the 210,000, 100,000 of those are covered by other federal programs, specifically RDOF, which is the FCC funding mechanism. Under the federal rules, those that are covered by those federal programs cannot be supplemented or given money under a state program that involves federal dollars. And so we're limited in providing and accelerating the coverage for those 100,000 Arkansans and households that are covered by other federal programs. That leaves us with 110,000 households that we have opportunity to get broadband to, and the consultants estimate that that will cost $500 million. And what's important is, because everybody wants broadband now, I want them to have broadband as well as quickly as we can get it to them. But under the current federal rules, 90% of the census blocks in Arkansas are covered by the federal programs, and they're exempt from our ability to accelerate those. And the federal plan is that the providers have 6 years to roll out that broadband. That's a long time. That's not as fast as I would like it to go. And I hope that we can accelerate our deployment to those 110,000 households, but I also hope the federal government will accelerate their deployment as well. What's going to be needed is that Secretary Preston and his team will have to revise the rules and work with the legislature on new rules to accommodate the recommendations of this report. And then we're also going to have to strengthen our broadband office. We're already working on that because this is a large, major oversight responsibility of the Department of Commerce, and we are looking ways to strengthen that. And that's one of the things that the federal government looks at as well as they deploy federal dollars here, as to the strength of our office. And so those are objectives that we have to do: revise the rules as well as strengthen our office. That leads me to the second point that I wanted to make today, which is that under the DFA analysis and where we are currently financially in the state of Arkansas, we expect to have a $1 billion surplus by June 30th of this year. And that exceeds the previous estimate of $600 million surplus whenever we had our last legislative session. Now that number has moved up to $1 billion based upon our economic performance in Arkansas, which is great news. Whenever you look at options for this money, I will certainly work with the legislature, listen to them. We'll all make a joint decision as to the steps that need to be taken. But one of the options would be to utilize our surplus or a portion of it to accelerate broadband deployment here in the state. And when I mentioned those federal programs, we can use state dollars to accelerate those, which is what we did with our Rural Connect program. And so that's a consideration and a possibility. I'm also concerned about the school facilities in Arkansas with the inflationary increases that we see for the cost of construction as to whether there needs to be additional funding for our school facilities programs. Another option, of course, would be tax relief to help the Arkansans that are dealing with inflationary pressures. Again, there's no decision point today. This is a conversation we'll be having with the legislature. There could be other options, obviously, and needs in the state, and so we'll be making a decision with them as time goes on. The third point I wanted to make before I turn it open for questions is that I wanted to release a letter that I have signed today and will be sent to Secretary Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Department of Treasury. That letter is being provided to you, and this letter advises the federal government that we're not going to accept the full amount of the second tranche of rental assistance funds. Currently, we have $6.7 million remaining in our rental assistance funds, and the federal government wants us to receive $146 million of additional money. Our economy has returned, there's jobs aplenty out there, and we have existing programs in place for rental assistance that were pre-pandemic. And we're back to the stage that people are working to the same extent pre-pandemic. We have the same opportunity for moving up the economic ladder, and so we need to revert back to the same rental assistance program we had before, but we cannot accept $146 million of additional money and expect to get that out and to utilize that effectively in the state. I am proposing in that letter, as you'll see, an alternative to the Secretary of Treasury, that we utilize 39% of those funds in housing stability efforts, and identified two specific nonprofits. There might be others that we can work with, Our House and Restore Hope, that we can utilize them not just to provide rent relief, but to provide housing stability. What is it that the tenant or the individual need? Is it some peer specialist that will help them to get the training they need to get a job? Is it drug addiction issues that we need to bring in support for? What is it that is the challenge in housing stability that we can utilize these funds for a specific effort that will make a difference in the lives of Arkansans? And I guess the unusual step is that this puts Arkansas as one of only two states that's saying no to this full tranche of federal dollars, Arkansas and Nebraska. I'll have a conversation with Gene Sperling of the White House later today, in which I'll go over these letters and I hope that they will approve our request for flexibility to have this type of housing stability initiative in Arkansas, and that they won't insist upon us taking the full amount in terms of rental assistance. And so I'm sure you'll have some questions after you look at that, but that's a important step that we're taking, and that's the reason that our leaders at DHS is here in case you have any more specific questions to ask about that. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
I guess two things on this, just so I don't have to do the math. The 39%, what would that amount to?
Well, I'd have to do the math. And so,
46?
yeah, and so, that's probably about $60 million in round numbers that we'd be looking at for this initiative.
And on the discussions about what to do with the surplus, I guess, what timeline are you looking at in terms of for a potential special session, and is there kind of or timeline for when you hope to have a decision on that?
Well, it would be, at the earliest, mid or late summer, if we did have one. And again, that decision has not been made. There might not be a consensus for it. I don't think anybody's in particular mood for a special session. I don't prefer to have that, but, we one are waiting on a Supreme Court decision that might impact whether that's a priority or not. And then secondly, whether there's additional legislative action that would be needed to address the issues of this large surplus.
I guess, are there any non-budget issues that beyond if there's an abortion ruling, beyond that you're looking at?
No, those are the only two factors right now in my mind that would be determining. And also, there's always the issue of a consensus among the legislature and the executive branch as to how we should proceed.
So you're talking about revising the rules, adding new rules in terms of broadband. What does that look like? Do you have any ideas in mind of what we could expect in terms of that?
Well, first of all, the legislature suggested in the broadband office, the broadband development group, the consultant, recommended that we have a grant program that is more competitive so that you can have a census tract, and rather than one person apply for it or one group, you actually compete for it and they bid for that. So that would be an additional step that would have to be taken. In addition, we want to be able to have the rules so that we can look at the accountability on the money and that we can trace it. So those are a couple of things that are critical in the changes that need to be made.
And in the report, there's talk about affordability. That's a huge issue, and I know that was talked about a lot in these meetings that were held over the state. What are you guys going to be doing in terms of making sure that Arkansans can afford this?
Well, that's the goal, and that's part of our criteria in looking at the different proposals for expanding broadband is, what's the ultimate cost to the consumer? Is it affordable? Is it fair to them? And so that absolutely will be part of the consideration.
Governor, why not take the full money other than federal fiscal responsibility?
I've thought a lot about that, and first of all, to me, when there's not the need in the state, whenever we have not fully utilized the resources that we have, when we've fully recovered and we're at a pre-pandemic stage, it makes no sense to start an absolutely new rental assistance program that would go on infinitum. And they also are part of their requirements is that the money would not be distributed as we're doing it now to landlord and tenant, but it would go to the tenant. And so under the restrictions that they have and under the best priorities that we would want to spend this money on, if we can't have that flexibility, it makes absolutely no sense to the taxpayers that we would utilize it for this purpose. So we have full employment, there's jobs opportunities out there, we have programs that are in place and community organizations that will help with rental issues, but we're going back to the rental support that we would have pre-pandemic. That makes sense to me. And this money, I wish it could go back to the Treasury, but it actually it would be recouped and sent elsewhere where there's greater needs. And to me, that's a responsible management of the taxpayers' dollars.
About a month ago, Representative French Hill on the House brought up concerns about funding not getting to the rural areas. Has there been anything done to address that?
Funding in terms of
Rent.
on rentals.
Yeah.
You know, it should be, and I'll, if Keith or Mary have any comment, you want to comment on this? I think y'all are great. Let's why don't you talk about that?
So hi, thank you. Keisa Smith, Deputy Director of DHS. And so we were aware of Representative Hill's bill and the conversation around that. We have looked at our current program, and there is coverage statewide. All areas of the state have access the current funds, and so all of our plans are ensuring that we make sure that individuals that are greatest in need, no matter where they're located in the state, have access to the funds, the housing stability funds that we are going to issue.
Thank you. That's the reason Director Smith is here. She knows the program.
And why choose Our House and Restore Hope? There are also other organizations within Arkansas.
Well, there could be others that will access this program. Those are just two examples of nonprofits that would be terrific in being able to work with the consumer, if you will, the citizens, in terms of housing stability. For example, Restore Hope, they're working on bringing those that are second offenders that have been released. One of the great needs is housing stability. And if we can provide peer counseling, if we can provide greater support so they can have housing stability, that helps us to reduce recidivism rate. It helps us to make sure they get on the path to success.
Governor, is there something, I've heard $1 billion surplus for a while. Is there something new about that?
Well,
Official now?
nothing's official until June 30th. It's only projections. But this is the first time I've used that number, $1 billion. Others have speculated or projected, but DFNA measures it. And, this month in April, of course, you will see the numbers in May for what happened in April, but you'll see a significant surplus just in this month. And I think that gave confidence that we are going to reach a $1 billion surplus.
This is the first time the DFNA has said
Yes.
this is going to happen.
Yep. Others have speculated, but this is the first time.
So, just to be clear, you don't have any figures in terms of buckets on, 300 million for broadband, 100 million for school facilities, 400 million for tax relief?
Well, I've learned that if I have buckets, the legislature likes to change the buckets and the alignment. Right. And so I want to be able to work with them as we really determine what we need to do.
And in terms of tax relief, are you looking at relaxing the temporary reduction of the sales tax, sending out $100 checks, reducing the marginal rate quicker than we're supposed to do, or the existing law allows?
Well, I mean, again, that is one option for getting some relief to the taxpayers. There's a number of different models that you can use to do that. No decision is made on the right model. I am not in favor of suspending temporary taxes. I think that is not a good permanent approach. I think a better approach is simply returning part of the surplus to the taxpayers directly. That's been done in the past. It's easy to implement, and it's always a challenge in fairness, and that's something we have to look at. But that's one of the options in that area that I would be most interested in. Yes, sir.
$500 million price tag attached to the broadband. Does that include the fiber and the wireless, or is that all fiber? And do you know if that's even feasible?
Go ahead, Mike.
That's all fiber. So that's, and because part of it is the requirements to have 120 upload download speed. In order to get that, you have to do fiber. So that was the recommendations coming out from BDG. It is feasible. I'd say that if you look in the details of the report, you will see that 60% of that is about 300 million of it covers about 90,000. The remaining 40% of that, 200 million, is the last 10,000 households. So those last few miles are going to be the most difficult ones to get to. So to answer your question, yes, it is feasible. Forgive my voice. It's coming back slowly.
Okay, I think we've covered here. I want to make one final point, since this is a pen and pad type environment. And you're going to see over the course of the next 3 or 4 months that I will be traveling to different states, and I'll be in New Hampshire this next week. It's generally for multiple purposes. I mean, everywhere I go, there's an economic development opportunity that we want to capitalize on. And that is very true in our trip, and Secretary Preston will be going, because we'll be calling on 6 Hour, one of our great industries here in the state of Arkansas, but also has a location in New Hampshire. And that's going to be true wherever I go. But the question always comes up, well, who pays for this? Well, I want to take a conservative approach, and so I have my national platform organization that will be paying for this trip coming to New Hampshire, even though it has some very legitimate economic development purposes. And so every trip might be different. And I just want you to know that we're trying to take a conservative approach to it. But if there's ever a question about that, please give me a call. Thank you all very much today.